Walk through the center of almost any historic city today, and you will hit a wall of bodies. Crowded streets and frustrated locals have become the defining visual symptoms of modern tourism. When we see streets jammed with people, our instinct is to treat the city exactly like a crowded elevator. We assume we can calculate a hard maximum capacity, print it on a plaque, and simply shut the doors when it gets full. This animated diagram shows exactly where that instinct comes from, a biological concept known as carrying capacity. It tracks the maximum number of a specific species that an area can sustain indefinitely, right up until the population depletes the local natural resources, that rigid red line. For decades, urban planners applied this exact biological math to human tourism. They tried using numerical caps to regulate visitor flows into congested places, and heavily restricted the number of accommodation units that could be built in an area. But mapping a wild deer population's grazing habits onto a complex human city creates a false sense of security. It assumes that discovering one magic number is all it takes to keep a destination from degrading. A forest ecosystem operates primarily on physical resources like water and vegetation. A human tourist destination introduces complex cultural, social, and economic variables that deer and trees do not possess. If calculating the limits of a natural habitat is relatively straightforward, why is it virtually impossible to find the exact full capacity number for a human city or a natural wonder? While animals merely try to survive in an environment, the presence of millions of humans threatens invisible qualitative thresholds. A strict numerical headcount of tourists completely misses these deeper layers of friction. This map visualizes physical carrying capacity, the maximum bodies a site holds before the environment degrades. Inside, a tighter boundary forms, social capacity, tracking the host population's tolerance. Finally, a third boundary overlaps, mapping economic capacity, balancing tourist revenue against local needs. Long before a plaza physically runs out of walking room, social capacity is breached when tourist conduct causes local resentment to boil over. Economic capacity fractures when a community's underlying industries, like agriculture or traditional manufacturing, are cannibalized to sell souvenirs to temporary visitors. A destination's true limit is a highly fragile, stacked composite of physical space, social tolerance, and economic stability. Even if a planner could perfectly measure those three complex dimensions, they would quickly find that the thresholds instantly shift. The target is always moving. First, consider the type of visitor. A luxury cruise ship passenger impacts an environment differently than a backpacker. Second, geography dictates resilience. Two different natural sites within the exact same region will react completely differently to the exact same volume of foot traffic. Third, time plays a massive role. Depending on the season or even the week's weather conditions, the capacity limits of a coastal town or a hiking trail will expand or contract. Fourth, there is the destination's life cycle. As a site ages and builds new infrastructure, its ability to absorb visitors evolves. Fifth, we have to account for environmental response time. Ecological degradation is highly unpredictable. A damaged reef might show a slow, gradual decay over a period of decades. On the other hand, some environmental responses are sudden, triggering dramatic die-offs or rapid soil collapse almost overnight following a capacity breach. Because these dynamic variables constantly collide, defining an exact static carrying capacity becomes an administrative challenge that is difficult to sustain in reality. To navigate this, modern planners rely on the framework shown in this animated diagram, the limits of acceptable change, or LAC. Notice how the rigid borders are replaced by a fluid baseline moving within a tolerance zone. This approach moves away from the attempt to stop all human impact on a destination. The core axiom of this framework acknowledges that any human use of the natural environment inevitably leads to alteration. The objective is to manage the destination through that change. In practice, planners establish a specific, predetermined level of alteration that the community is willing to tolerate. Strict regulatory responses are only triggered when those specific thresholds are threatened. Determining this threshold of acceptable change requires an ongoing process of negotiation and compromise with the host population. Sustainable tourism focuses on actively negotiating the survival and quality of a living, evolving community, rather than just chasing a mathematical maximum.